Hello, I'm Jen Moore, Music of the Baroque's program annotator, and welcome to Baroque Notes, our virtual series of pre-concert talks. A lot of festive music has been written for Christmas, but for Johann Sebastian Bach, writing all the music for Christmas was simply part of his job as town cantor of Leipzig. During the Christmas season, his very first year, Bach composed or revised the first version of the Magnificat, the Sanctus, and six cantatas. And it was for this very same set of feast days in 1734, 11 years later, that he produced the Christmas Oratorio. I'm going to touch on two primary themes in this talk. First, I'll discuss whether the Christmas Oratorio is really an oratorio at all. The second issue springs from a seed planted when I was a teenager in the 1980s. I just totally dated myself. I was a big fan of David Bowie, and I loved Under Pressure, the song he wrote in 1981 with Freddie Mercury and Queen. I wasn't the only one of my friends who was shocked when Robert Matthew Van Winkle, better known as Vanilla Ice, came out with this hit in 1989.
Yo, VIP, let's kick it. Ice, ice, baby. Ice, ice, baby. All right, stop, collaborate and listen. Ice is back with my brand new invention. Something grabs a hold of me tightly, flow like a harpoon daily and nightly. Will it ever stop? Yo, I don't know. Turn off the lights and I'll glow. To the extreme, I rock a mic like a vandal. Light up a stage and wax a chump like a candle. Dance, crush a speaker that booms. I'm killing your brain like a poisonous mushroom. Deadly when I play a dope.
And then the other day, a colleague who happens to be younger than me told me about this 2023 release by Tyga called Bop's Goin' Brazy.
Stop.
I'm happy to stop. And I promise I will circle back to how Queen and Vanilla Ice relate to Bach's Christmas Oratorio. But first, let's talk about whether the Christmas Oratorio is, in fact, an oratorio at all. The earliest oratorios appeared in Italy in the 17th century, and they were relatively simple works written for a few soloists plus a continuo group, which is basically a backing group consisting of a harpsichord and a bass instrument like a cello. But by Bach and Handel's time in the 18th century, oratorios had essentially become religious opera, but without scenery or costumes. Handel's oratorios, most famously Messiah, or Jephthah, which we just released the first American recording of worldwide, shameless plug, are the quintessential example. Bach's Christmas Oratorio doesn't fit this definition, and on the face of it, it's not even a single piece. It consists of six cantatas written to be performed on different feast days during the church service between the reading of the gospel and the sermon. The six cantatas were even performed in different locations. The printed booklet that the Leipzig congregation used in 1734 suggests that the first, second, fourth, and sixth parts of the Christmas Oratorio were performed at the two churches in Leipzig where Bach worked, the Thomaskirche and the Nikolaikirche. Parts 3 and 5 were heard only at the Nikolaikirche. If the Christmas Oratorio was written for 6 separate services in 2 different churches, why call it an oratorio and perform it as a single piece? Well, for one, Bach almost certainly thought of it that way. His 19th century biographer, Philipp Spitta, reminds us that the church thought of the whole Christmas season, not just the day of Christmas. As he says, the church itself regarded the whole period till Twelfth Night, From Christmas Day, that is, till the Epiphany, which had been held as a feast even in heathen Germany, he said that, not me, as one festival season of which the birth of Christ was a central idea. Thus, irrespective of the fact that the 6 portions of the Christmas Oratorio deal with a progressive series of events, they must be held, according to church views, to constitute a whole. Throughout the 6 cantatas, the Christmas story is told through the evangelist in text drawn from Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 21, and Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, taking us from Joseph and Mary going to Nazareth for the census in part 1, to the 3 wise men bringing the baby Jesus gold, frankincense, and myrrh in part 6. So while the Christmas oratorio may not be an oratorio in the truest sense, it's basically a super cantata, the ultimate cantata for one of the major Christian holidays. So let's talk about the basic structure of part 1, because if we go through all 6, that would be almost as long as a Christmas oratorio. So I'm not going to do that. So part 1, just the first day of Christmas. It's just like the other 5 for the most part. They're not completely identical, but the basic structure is close to the form Bach used for regular Sunday services. There's a choral movement, alternating recitatives and arias, and as a conclusion, a traditional Lutheran chorale, and the congregation probably would have sung along with the chorus. Well, the story advances through gospel text sung by the evangelist. The arias and choral movements reflect on the action through newly written poetry provided by Christian Friedrich Henrici, who, under the nom de plume Picander, also created the libretto for the St. Matthew Passion. In part 1, the opening chorus sets the tone. The text reads, "Rejoice, exult, arise, praise the day," and the music reflects this joy perfectly, with the upbeat tempo, bright major mode, and string and trumpet fanfares. Bach sets the words so that the chorus literally sounds like people calling out and rejoicing. Next, the evangelist launches into the familiar story from Luke's gospel. And it came to pass that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Bach's evangelist sings the text in straightforward recitative or speech-like song.
Es begab sich aber zu der Zeit, dass ein Gebot von dem Kaiser Augusto ausging, dass alle Welt geschätzt würde. Und jedermann ging, dass sich schätzen ließe, ein jeglicher in seine Stadt.
The arias and chorales offer a sort of meta-level commentary on the story or the scripture. For instance, after the evangelist sings, "And while they were there, the time came for her to be delivered," the aria Prepare thyself, Zion, contemplates the significance of the coming of Christ for humankind. The commentary doesn't stop there. In a stroke of genius, Bach uses the chorale known as O Sacred Head Now Wounded, so familiar from the St. Matthew Passion, but with a different text. As the choir asks, how shall I receive thee and how shall I encounter thee? The music already foreshadows the resurrection. We then celebrate the actual birth in the aria with trumpet, Great Lord and Mighty King. The first day of Christmas concludes with the chorale lullaby, O Little Jesus, My Heart's Love, but with celebratory blasts from the trumpets that aren't really appropriate for a sleeping baby, which Bach, as somebody who had 20 children, would have known. Within the straightforward structure, there is a great deal of drama, and the arias and choruses offer poetic commentary that enhances the scripture. And this holds basically true throughout the rest of the work. So now, let's return to my crazy preamble with Queen and David Bowie, Vanilla Ice and Tyga. The common thread was reuse of music. In that case, Vanilla Ice and Tyga actually stealing from Queen. Queen actually sued Vanilla Ice. Tyga just got criticized by everybody for emulating Vanilla Ice. The Christmas Oratorio contains notorious examples of Bach stealing from himself. Let's listen to that fantastic opening chorus again. And now let's listen to the opening of Cantata 214, which Bach composed the year before in 1733 in honor of the birthday of Maria Josepha, Princess Electress of Saxony and Queen of Poland. That's right. Bach used his own music for Rejoice, Exult from Resound Ye Drums, which he had written the year before. He does this in other parts of the Christmas Oratorio too. Now, today, this is actually called self-plagiarism, and in schools is a punishable offense, almost as bad as copying someone else's work. It's hard not to think of this as cheating, but in the Baroque, this was standard practice. Bach scholar Christoph Wolff notes that Bach worked just as hard to produce music for single occasions that could never be repeated. Repurposing his efforts, Sal actually suggests that Bach felt his music was worth being heard more than once. Also, the delineation between secular and sacred probably didn't mean as much to Bach, who was profoundly devout and felt that everything he did was in service of God. To me, talking about Baroque composers reusing their material, or Handel, who is famous for it, says a lot more about our own biases today, about originality and ownership. The idea of the composer as author didn't exist in the same way in the Baroque. It's more a product of the 19th century. We think of Bach as a master, and I'm sure he knew his value, but the music he wrote was part of his job and ultimately in service to God. It wasn't about him. Concepts like intellectual property and copyright are very much a product of our time. And while a deep discussion falls outside the scope of this issue of Baroque Notes, contemplating all the forces that led to that change in thinking, the advent of recording, for example, or the ease of reproduction in the digital age, is pretty fascinating. I hope this edition of Baroque Notes will enhance your enjoyment of Bach's Super Cantata, the Christmas Oratorio, on Sunday, November 24th at the North Shore Center in Skokie, Monday, November 25th at Symphony Center downtown, and on demand from November 29th through December 29th. Thank you so much.